concise. It's aspirational in a really tight, good way. And so why not just say, as Flagstaff of Falls, we commit to preserving our unique character and safeguarding our precious natural resources, because that's pretty inclusive of everything.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, I would almost make the opposite argument, and I suppose that's probably why that portion of the sentence is there, is that, you know, the history of African American lumberyard workers, you know, in the South Side is a rich history. Like the history of our indigenous predecessors is a rich history, you know, and the history of the white settlers is a rich history as well. Like they're all part of that.
History in a neutral sense.
Yeah, I mean, and that was my idea. Like, not just to say, like, yeah, the history of the buildings built downtown by
right.
It's every.
And to piggyback off of what David said, I kind of see his perspective a little bit better now. Is like, irregardless of how we determine what that history looked like, it's still the history of what actually went down.
True.
I thought just because, you know, the whole history that have the kids, you know, his story, whatever the pieces I thought heritage because it starts with her, but
that's a fine point.
So because we're also doing a community center and a STEM center that's about ready to break loose, I think that's going to go to resiliency as well. And I don't see that. I'd like to see something in there regarding that, because diversity and resiliency are where we're headed. We're worried about housing, we're worried about environment, all those things, but then we are having to think about sustainability a little bit and resiliency, and Flag has really been working on that. So just trying to think how that's placed. Well, somebody said in here promoting compact growth and affordable housing, but I'm thinking maybe more like in the interconnected resiliency mode. Like, people are wanting to connect, they want to be resilient. We want to come up with something that's a little bit more common, I guess, between everyone. But it's also resiliency, right? How are we going to grow, but how are we going to stay together? I mean, I should have given something to you, but I haven't had time to eat in the last month, so my bad.
Do you have an idea of how you change like the proposal that's you're kind of working on up on the screen? I kind of blew it up and made it bigger.
Right, so you have rich history, natural resources, resiliency is nowhere. So opportunity to thrive, and take the city into, or take us into the future. I'm just trying to come up with something that throws us in.
I think Tina has a great suggestion, and I'm wondering if we could put it in, we aim to foster an resilient community where all residents have the opportunity to thrive.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Is that
might
something?
right there.
Thank you. You took it right out of my head.
One thing that I think is missing is anything about the economy. I think a vibrant economy is essential to our future. And especially with the housing crisis, a better economy with better jobs, more income is a great way to afford better housing. I think we should have something about a vibrant economy. And
I'm gonna,
yeah, I had my use of the word opportunity there was somewhat tied to that, right? In that it's, you know, the our American system is, you know, supposed to be.
I think it should be more specific.
One where everyone has the opportunity to.
Because opportunity can be educational opportunity, athletic opportunity.
that's the beauty of it. It can also be like economic opportunity.
Vibrant.
I'm gonna push back on it just a little bit, Tom. So this is where it becomes political, and that's what we're trying to keep out of the mission statement. We're not trying to, you know, if it was that way, like our last regional plan would just be the new regional plan, how everybody had something to say and they fit every single word that everybody said into each one of them. Now there is that argument out there, which I'm not saying I espouse, but I do know of it, and that is actually if we eliminated some of the resources or economic resources that are going out to like things that don't matter to us. Let's say tourism, we would eliminate businesses. We would make this town smaller, but we would still thrive, and we would actually might do better in the long run if we weren't just wasting, throwing out money to house people that don't live here, to make sure that their weekend has a great picture to end with, things like that. There is a group in Flagstaff that thinks that actually less economy is more. So because we don't want to have argumentative statements inside of these things, that's my pushback.
There's a whole part of the economy, a whole part of the society in Flagstaff that thinks that a vibrant economy is essential. So,
Yeah.
so there you have it.
Just have a comment from the chat, if people could say their name as they're speaking so that the people online can hear better.
Okay.
So
No, that's good.
So does anybody else have a comment on how we could interlace economy? Or are we okay with opportunity?
I think that where it says where all residents have the opportunity to thrive, I think that covers a vibrant economy.
I think so too. I like the broader term.
Yeah, it's for a mission statement for
short-
sure. Now, there's gonna be places in this plan. Sarah, I'm looking at you, where there's gonna be plenty of opportunity to, for lack of a better word, to put in the economy.
Yeah. Diane, would you like if we changed rich history to diverse heritage? That would better?
I actually have come around to appreciating that rich is an inclusive term. And yeah,
And then for time's sake, if you really want to put this argument to the parking lot, it's David's follow. You have to have some sort of resolution to move on together.
That's fine.
We good with it?
There's one more comment from the chat from Ali. I would like to see economy used.
What's that?
Ali's comment in the chat was, I would like to see economy used.
You got 2 for economy.
Do you want to do with round or John? I'm sorry.
And I would just add, I don't have a suggestion for how we should include it, but I also believe it should be included somehow.
Yeah,
I mean, on one hand, I almost feel like it's so obvious that it should be included, and your comments are very well taken and important, and I think it's at the base of so much of what we hope to do and how it can be possible.
You have 3 for economy.
Sorry, I don't have a suggestion on how to work it in.
I don't mind everyone has lessons with that, and I don't have it in there. You do that.
Everything.
Yeah.
Anyone want to make a pitch?
I could go in right after resilient community somehow. How do we word that? Just bang, bang. Resilient
And
community. How do we fledgling that right through it, right after that?
Resilient community and economy.
Okay, why
there you
not?
go.
Then you're just bringing it all together, right, John?
Yeah, keeps me.
You like that, Tom?
Yeah, that's good.
Kind of like that. There you go.
Are all the natives good with that?
Can everyone live with it?
Mhm.
Live with it. He's right.
Live with it.
There's another suggestion from Ali in the chat to put vibrant in front of economy.
Environment.
I like that better.
I do.
I agree.
That's fine. That's great.
I don't know though. I mean, how much are we gonna sacrifice for this vibrance, for our natural resources and the amount of land use, just so we could, we can't drink money, we can't eat money.
Well, how about this? Is gore a bad thing in Flagstaff?
Pepsi, what else we got?
Yeah,
Purina,
yeah, we have.
we got him.
Yeah, there is some good things.
Okay. I think everyone can live with that, right?
Definitely, yes.
Okay.
And where does vibrant go? Where's it go?
She put it right in front of economy.
Resilient and vibrant. I thought we were gonna say resilient community and vibrant economy.
The AI wrote off of that, so.
And then-
You can say.
Produced by
Produced by-
ChatGPT, thank you.
All right, we're gonna do the draft resource stewardship and resilience chapter next. Does everyone have a way to access that? So they have it in front of them.
I have a few copies if needed.
You have a copy?
Yeah.
So, my suggestion, if everyone was okay with it, is that, we really kind of skip over discussion in this forum of the introductory paragraphs and focus on the actual goals and policies as the kind of the meat of what we're doing here. And if you guys have comments on the specific language of those introductory paragraphs, if you provide those in writing.
Can I say one thing? about that?
Yes.
I know I asked in the email and I sent like the tickler list of things that we might want to discuss or talk about. One thing to know is I do have like a list of legal requirements from the state statutes. So there's just some things that even though, especially in this chapter, for some reason, it seems like a little out of place. Air quality is one that, for instance, a lot of people said, well, if we don't have any air quality problems, why do we write about it? And it's because the state told us we meet all the air quality standards, but it says in the state statute that we have to make an affirmative statement of that in the plan. So there is like some, so while I want people to look and say what feels like too much text, I do want to state that I won't be deleting anything that's required by the state statute, just to make sure everyone knows.
Well, I'm confused here. So I did read this chapter, so chapter this afternoon. I wrote stuff in it and I open it up here and it only has an introductory paragraph and nothing else. So I did the same one, flag.az.sharepoint.com, blah, 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 regional plan update layouts and no text except for this little box that says, so why?
And when you scroll down, you don't,
Scroll down, nothing, it's just blank, 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 blank.
it might be taking a second to load if we're all on a wide
Okay,
zone.
I just thought, wow,
So,
it's only like a couple.
because Elsa has it up here on the screen. and it's-
Okay, I'll look on the screen.
Yeah.
That's what I looked.
So can I ask a question? Sure. Anthony and David. One online, but we allowed to put comments into that? Because,
Not the one that's part of your packet.
right, I didn't think so. So
No.
I saved mine as a separate document.
Yes,
made
if you
comments
put
on that.
comments, didn't save it locally, it doesn't save it on the SharePoint. Your link only gave you access to the document.
So there's no way to put comments on it.
No, not right. No, because it's like your frozen packet. So you can't just save them on this. It's not a review. This is your packet, so.
Okay, well, I'm getting confused in that I did this like a little before lunch, shut it down, came back, and I actually did type things in, and there they were there. And so I thought, oh, well, maybe somebody is gonna, the soup is just invisible to me, confusion. But no, it's not there. Okay,
I'm sorry.
well, I'm just, I was puzzled. It's okay.
So could we talk about process? Just like this idea of saving it to your own computer? And then also one of the things that this is backing up a little bit. One of the things that I was thinking as I was reviewing this is I would really like to see what the previous version looked like. Because there might have been things in there that I'd want in here. And so is there a way to do that for future chapters? Are you able to like save the final review with everyone's comments on it?
So that's what we talked about last time that I was not going to do.
Okay,
If you recall, at the end of the meeting, I said there were over 175
you did
comments
say
on 9 pages. And I said, do you want me to bring you the marked up version with all 175 comments? And the answer was no. So I wrote a 2-page summary of those 175 comments and how I included them. And, you know, this is a second draft of 5. And my preference and what I wrote in the writing and review guide is that we are not going to start tracking changes until after this meeting. There's no track changes prior to this. Like I do have some versioning history. I can pull up older versions, but you know,
Okay, so I'll just save it
those are kind
myself.
of our deliberative process.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
fine. And
those
thanks for
aren't
the reminder.
necessarily something we're gonna put on the website or offer extra copies of. They're
Yeah.
really just for our deliberation.
That's fine. I'll
Once-
just save it myself and then.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really understand what that meant till I started reviewing.
That's
You know
fair.
what I mean? It's one of those kind of.
It's a good clarification. And I do have a copy with everybody's comments on it if you'd like to see it, but I'm not gonna put it in the packet if that's okay.
That's fine.
Thank you.
All right, so we start with the first one. And have a quick discussion. I would encourage folks, if you think that one of the policies or the goals, is just kind of sort of necessary or obvious that we need to spend a lot of time discussing it. Please make that point so that we can move on to the next one. So our first goal, Sarah has up here, is the Flagstaff region is a leader in the scientific, social, economic, and cultural practices that prioritize environmental stewardship and resilience planning.
I just had a question. I'm sorry. I just had a question about the phraseology.
Yeah.
It says it's a goal,
it's
but
not
then we
an
say
action
the
word.
Flagstaff region is.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's no action word in there.
It should be something we're trying to strive for, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Aims to be.
Strives to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Whitney, does anyone else have any other comments on this one? This one seems to me like, yeah, sure.
Everybody should go to
I want to
heaven.
be lost. Aims to be 25%. Implementation guideline, for me, that one goes a little bit too far into the obvious. I wrote, I think on the comments I shared with Sarah, no shit.
That's why I didn't share that with everybody.
Yeah. So I guess kind of what, I mean, I suppose, where is this coming from? What's that there's a point here that's not coming across, it's too obvious. So what is the point that we're trying to make?
I think there is just some advocacy that we make sure that there's scientific underpinnings for our decisions and not necessarily, and that's properly disclosed as part of decision making in the area of natural resources. So, and I think that is because what I remember from hearing people talk about this as the drafts and comments we're going through is there's kind of sometimes an emotional or social attachment to natural resource things that has nothing to do with how natural resource and ecosystems actually work. Like an example that I've run into in the past is people really like seeing deer and elk in their neighborhood, but there are places where Arizona Game and Fish says if we let deer and elk cross this road, their mortality increases greatly. And so, you know, you might really like seeing elk and deer, but are you comfortable with them dying so you can see them? Like there's, you know, is that how the ecosystem should work, or is that how we feel about natural resources? So I think that's why that was a proposed guideline, but
Does anyone have any suggestions? As how-
suggestions are.
Yeah, reword that in a way that
Well,
brings across what's services.
I mean, I'm trained in biology, right? And so I look at this and this is like a no duh.
Yeah,
But how would you change it to be, I mean, I think what Sarah said, this already says to me. I don't see any need to change it. It's basically saying we're going to use science to make decisions about what's done with our natural resources. And you have to say that kind of thing in this world.
yeah, no, I
Yep.
mean, it doesn't, to me, it's the integrate available part, I think that is problematic, the rest of it. Right,
What about the term of art now is use best available science? So you could say, use best available science in policies governing the use and conservation of Flagstaff's natural and cultural resources. And Sarah, just for my own help as we get now into the nitty gritty, I'm trying to think through like the process as a planner. That first day you told us that our goal here is to create a very concise document, but that doesn't leave a lot of ambiguous discretion up to staff. Am I correct? As you
I don't think
implement,
that's what I said. I mean, because staff has to have some discretion
Right,
for
but-
different scenarios, like as we're writing about something very broad at this scale, there's gonna have to be some, knowledge that staff has that's used to implement it. But I think what we didn't want is a lot of conflicting policies and policies that said, this is the highest value and this thing that is the opposite, or that is also, also difficult to achieve is also equally high value. Like we didn't want to have a document where there were no priorities.
yeah.
okay,
So
I understand that.
So yeah, so that we shouldn't have goals that are competing with each other. In
Correct.
the sense that we should take one or the other.
But I also got a sense that you wanted as much clarity as possible about intent.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I offer a suggestion in terms of the science. I think accepted might be a better word. I've had a little bit of experience with this because I've had to go through the peer review process and submitting papers and engineering reports. And accepted, there's a lot of science out there. Some people, it is not accepted generally, and has not been proven. So that gives you some latitude, I think, to examine it. And believe it or not, this kind of thing that the Planning and Zoning Commission for the county, we do consider in some cases. It does enter into the decision making. So it's something to think about.
I was wondering ensure policies governing the use and conservation of Flagstaff natural and cultural resources are backed by the best available science, or reference the best available science.
I think available is still open for discussion on that. Because
Versus
I
accepted.
have to tell you,
Yeah,
I
I
couldn't
like
get
that.
away with that. Getting something published. Peer review, it wouldn't stand. I'd have to be a little more detailed in describing it. If I used a term like that.
how about informed policies governing the use and conservation of Flagstaff natural and cultural resources using best available science, acceptable, whatever, put it at the end.
That would work too.
Best available and accepted.
Bingo.
Everyone good with it?
Can someone repeat the
Sure.
sentence as Diane said?
Ensure that policies governing the use and conservation of Flagstaff's natural and cultural resources are informed by the best available and accepted science.
Thank you.
That.
I like that.
Totally agree.
That flows well.
Hey, policy RS one is prepare the Flagstaff. Prepare the flags. Prepare the Flagstaff regions.
Human.
Human and natural systems to be more resilient to short-term shocks. Long-term.
Shocks just seems like a strange word to me to have there. Short-term emergencies.
Yeah, you have impacts in there as well, so short and long-term impacts.
Yeah,
So remove the word shocks.
Unless it has a kind of specific.
Mhm.
Connotation.
That's the extra word.
Mean something different than the impacts. You mind?
Is Jenny on? Jenny Newman? Or Genevieve?
Hi.
Thank you. Hi.
We're both here.
Can you answer the question of the committee? Is the word shocks important or meaningful in a particular way, or is it fine to strike it?
Yeah. Hi, folks. Jenny Neiman. I'm the Climate Action Section Director. I have my son here with us, so you'll hear him too. So we think about shocks as sort of like a flood event, right? A wildfire, right? We kind of try to think about sort of like shocks to the system. I agree that it's not a term that's often used, but we try to think about them as like events. That is essentially the way that we think about it from a sort of resilience standpoint, adaptation standpoint, thinking about those events.
Climate shocks, I don't.
could you say short-term systemic shocks?
I don't think it's needed.
Elsa, do you mind zooming out or something so we can see the last part of that sentence? Be more resilient to, yeah, short-term shocks. Okay. It could be rephrased as, short-term events, right? There's like disaster terminology that could be used here as well. But go ahead.
So short-term events is what could replace shocks.
Tina said catastrophic.
I said catastrophic or climate because that's what we
So
are been dealing with, but
something to
maybe
describe
that's too,
Yeah, I mean,
Catastrophic
that
events.
gets to the point.
That gets
we
kind
are
of-
thinking about these short-term, things like, Fort Valley Road flooding, right? Versus boundary of the ponderosa pine forest moving, those are two different things.
Mhm.
I like that.
So then it would reread, prepare the Flagstaff region's human and natural systems to be more resilient to short-term catastrophic events and long-term impacts of climate change. What are human systems? Anything that humans use to support themselves and society. Infrastructure, social service networks, housing, those are all human systems.
Will that be in the glossary?
Sure, you can add anything you want to the
That'd be great to put in the glossary.
Yeah, I have a question, is this meant for the general public to be able to read and understand? Or is it just mainly for city staff?
It has to serve both audiences.
Okay, so so that's where I guess the word shocks just seems strange there to me, but I like how the way the conversation's going, but just overall, I just needed to know that. Thanks.
Making like industry specific terms, more conversational is kind of what the point is.
Yeah. Good suggestion.
If one of us has to ask what it means.
Yeah.
Is everyone good with this one? The way we change the two words, one word. All right, so the implementation guideline for this one, Sarah, am I correct in saying we're effectively saying reference the carbon neutrality plan?
Correct.
Yeah.
The county does not have an equivalent document at this time.
I mean, I like that. I liked, it was gonna be like my one comment for the meeting last week. Was talking about how we have a housing affordability plan, we have a climate plan, that needs to sort of, and these are all things that should flow through the entire document. Put that in there on separate sections. So I'm really glad that was the resolution on that too. Does anyone have any comments on that implementation guideline, or are we all fine with the way in which it references the carbon neutrality plan? Okay. Policy RS2 is address climate change, protect air quality in a manner that equitably distributes the impacts, costs, and benefits of adaptation and mitigation based on the carbon neutrality plan.
Yeah, just briefly there.
No,
Okay. So she-
thank you.
There were some comments that we received of people said, why does it say protect air quality? And that's one of those things is because the state of Arizona says we have to say protect air quality somewhere. So it'll say it.
That's out.
I don't want it in there.
Does anyone have any comments on this one?
Comments on the implementation guideline?
I don't know if they're based on the carbon neutrality and all the. if it's in
Oh,
parentheses.
Everything in parentheses will get deleted.
Okay, gotcha.
Those are just notes for you all. So you go, where did Sarah come up with this? Those are all getting deleted.
Any comments on the implementation guidelines? I had one comment. I felt that the carbon dioxide removal piece was kind of overly specific. Right, so we've got regularly prepare and reassess strategies as the kind of top piece, but then we've got just one very specific strategy. That's whole paragraph down below. And I suppose also further right, like that sentence is one of the guidelines for implementation. You already right, so I'm just.
I don't know. I'd have to have Genevieve answer that question.
I had the same question.
Yeah.
Can I ask Jen?
Genevieve?
Hey Sarah, I couldn't hear very well. What was the question?
Sure. Can you rephrase it?
Establish initiatives to support carbon dioxide removal, or something functionally similar is one of the goals, policies, whatever they're called, of the carbon neutrality plan. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
We just ask, is that the appropriate place to put it, Joe? Is that relevant to air quality? Carbon dioxide removal is a different,
Yeah,
it has to do with the air, but it's not
it's relevant to climate change, right? Which is
climate
in
change.
that the policy about. And it just felt to me like it was too specific of a, you know.
Yeah.
We're saying refer to the CMP for guidelines for implementation, but when we just put one right there in the body and not any.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
So
agree.
Genevieve, I guess that's the question is, if I can restate it, is carbon dioxide removal one of the strategies already in the carbon neutrality plan, or is it an additional strategy?
So
Is that the
it
question?
in the carbon neutrality plan, but it's like the first implementation guideline, the one that says to regularly prepare and assess climate change strategies, is one part of the carbon neutrality plan, and the CDR is another part. And they're kind of like, there's some overlap, but they are different. So that's why they're there. And Jenny, I see you just jumped on, so feel free to add on.
No, I think that's great. Thanks, folks. You know, carbon dioxide removal is about half of the carbon neutrality plan's emission reductions. And I think the idea is that carbon dioxide removal, if it is catalyzed in this region, both the city and the county could be a really important player in that game. And it also could require sort of landscape scale operations. And so I think that that was the thinking behind putting it in here. It's also a relatively new idea, technology, it's emerging, you know, and so I think that that is why we wanted to call it out specifically as a little bit different, right? It's not reducing emissions. It is taking, you know, carbon dioxide out of the air. And so I completely understand why it got flagged for, yeah, why is this so specific? But I think that due to how novel it is, and also how big of a role it plays in both our climate planning, but also potentially in our region, is some of the rationale behind there.
Probably a really good example about why we want science guideline in the first place is because there are emerging technologies that we want to be able to evaluate like
Yeah,
this
and
as well. So
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
Well, now I'm more confused because I'm wondering, is this implementation guideline related to carbon burial? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about biomass removal? Or are you talking about actually doing a carbon removal from the atmosphere and injecting it?
I mean, it could be.
All the above.
All of the above. Oh, okay.
I mean, I think kind of to that point, right? I guess 2 points. One, I'm hearing that we basically have said this is an implementation guideline that we think is especially important, and therefore we called it out separately to put it in here, which is, I think, feel to me a stand in opposition to the idea that we're using the CMP itself to determine the implementation guidelines. And then secondly, to Diane's point, I mean, if we want to provide the flexibility to pursue that goal, we want it to be in the CMP, but it can be addressed there, not call it out specifically. Yeah.
I've got a little different point of view on it. Considering that this is a policy document, not regulatory, one of the things you could say is that initiatives should be established as a recommendation. They're actually making a recommendation, whether it is in the goal or the implementation of it in a policy document like this. It's aspirational. That is to be expected with any kind of a policy document. As long as you keep in mind that it's not regulatory, and you craft the wording so that it is not mistaken as regulatory, there's no reason why you couldn't keep a statement like this in the document.
I mean, I would say that if the climate folks on staff think it's important to pull it out, I mean, that's their world, right? I don't see there's a problem. It's one sentence. It seems pretty simple. The other comment I had is Sarah said everything in parentheses is going to be taken out, right? So RS2 will have that based on carbon neutrality plan taken out, right? Removed from that sentence. And so do we want to actually leave it there? Because I don't think the public's going to really know where that comes from unless we reference back to the carbon neutrality plan.
In parentheses, you create the acronym CDR. Is that what you're talking about here?
Oh, for the second one, yeah.
Yeah, CDR simply is an acronym.
Right.
That that's normal part of it.
Right, and I was talking about the policy at the very top, where it talks
okay.
about carbon neutrality plan, but if that's gonna be taken out, then
Yeah.
how are we saying that that's actually what you're supposed to follow?
Yeah, in
Unless
that
we keep it
case-
in there,
I've got to agree with you.
right, because I expected that to be in there, so. So that's a point of clarification to leave that, if you guys agree.
Sarah, did you hear that?
Sorry.
Sorry, there, did you want to just repeat that?
Yeah, so you said recently that you're gonna take out everything in the final that's in parentheses.
Yeah.
And
Those were
RS2,
just notes for you. Yes.
right, but RS2 says based on the carbon neutrality plan, and I'm suggesting that we keep that so that people know where that came from.
Okay,
And so that's clear that we're following the carbon neutrality plan.
okay.
So,
I mean, you
What do
can
you
say
think?
that in a sentence. About that. That's what we're- The implementation guideline. is
oh
that
yeah,
we'll be
implementation
following
of, right?
neutrality.
True, good point. I was just looking at what you had up there. Yeah, so,
Yeah, this,
maybe it
in this
doesn't matter.
draft, it is a little confusing, because there's places where there's notes for you as a reviewer that are gonna start to come out. This is why we're in the middle, draft essentially, so. But if you want me to keep something like that, you can, but remember, there's no carbon neutrality plan for the county.
right,
So
Right.
that's the
that's the problem,
the
right?
nature of the joint document.
Yeah, so they'll have to say something else, right?
Well, they're basically, the county would adopt RS1 and RS2 and then figure out how to implement it for the county.
Could I just say a word about that? One thing that I think that everybody should have is the presentation that went to the Board of Supervisors in 2013, the adoption of the last or the existing regional plan, because this is an issue that was addressed. It has already been addressed at the Planning and Building Commission of the county. And I've got some of the answers in what was conveyed to the board about how to deal with that. There are several ways, and what I would like to do is, Melissa already has this data, but to make it available to everyone else on the committee, what was presented to the board in terms of how to deal with this and what the board could do in adopting this as an amendment. It would take too much time to go over that here this evening. But
And that's a more of a process question that when we get to that part of the plan writing, that we can, look at that again and see if there's possibly something that we need to clarify.
everybody has the information that was presented at that time to look at and review. It'll give you a better understanding of the process, as Melissa says. So that jumping down the road becomes a process. But it would be good to have it right now because it may help further discussions like this.
Alrighty, so we have, I suppose my suggestion would be in this switch regarding the carbon dioxide removal, that census be removed. I think Michelle has stated that she would see it stay in. So then I think it's appropriate to just, so we can move on, take a vote on in or out.
Can we have an amendment to it, rather than in or out? Amend it to put it in a place where it's more appropriate to other things related to the carbon neutrality plan. It just doesn't, to me, it just doesn't seem as though it correlates well with air quality. I mean, I agree that it's an important part of the carbon neutrality plan. It just doesn't seem like it relates to air quality as I think of air quality.
Yeah, but that policy is in regards to climate change and air quality.
Okay,
Like
all
that
right,
first,
okay,
so it says that climate change and protect air quality.
okay.
Actually, ready to do a vote?
Do you want me to do it by roll? Or do you want to go around the room and then around on mine?
Let's do a show of hands and comments for people online. All right. All those in favor of removing it?
Removing,
If you're,
Yes, removing established initiatives to support carbon dioxide removal on lands in and around Flagstaff.
Yeah, it's the,
Take
Nelson's got it right there. I can see the chat. If anybody would like to vote affirmative on that, removing it, you think you can put it in the chat now. Then no one's adding to the chat.
Okay, all those opposed, so we're removing it?
You're opposed? One. Abe, are you up or down?
Neither.
Neither. 1, 2, 3. Anyone online? Four were for removing it and 6 for keep it, and then 14 abstained, or I'm sorry, 8 abstained.
All right, so it stays, we'll move on to the next one. RS3, which is preserve dark skies as an unspoiled natural resource that supports ecosystem health and brings scientific benefits to those regions. Comments?
Is it an unspoiled natural resource? Because we don't have total dark sky. We're protecting what dark skies we have now. Yep. Just delete the word unspoiled. Just.
Implementation guideline, development projects requesting alternative standards for increased density, flat intensities that have the potential to impact dark sky outside of existing regulations should be evaluated for additional mitigation measures that mitigate the impacts. Any comments?
Can you give me an example of what an additional mitigation measure is for this?
On this. So I think it was written from staff, so Michelle McNulty, for those online. So I think it was written, kind of like, I'm gonna use the hospital as an example, so. We have our dark sky standards, and they are for our typical development being what's about. In that instance, they were proposing a pretty significant, tall tower. And so I think it was written in the spirit of that, when you have something that is asking for, a variation from code in that kind of significance, that staff, kind of having an ability to look at that a little more closely and make it knowing that our lighting standards being wouldn't cover for the tower was 160 foot tall versus a 60-foot building. That was the spirit.
John,
I have to agree with that completely, because we've done that without current lighting code at the county level for quite some time. I've been kind of the cheerleader on that. But I do have a little bit of a problem in editing here. The last sentence, when you say additional mitigation measures that can mitigate the impacts to light pollution. How about just taking mitigation, the first mitigation out, just saying additional measures that can mitigate. And that makes it much more clear. And by the way, we've done a lot of that at the county level too.
I might request that we close development projects requesting significant alternative standards. Like the example we gave is a significant example, asking for one. Oh, right, yeah, exactly.
That's fair.
All right, everyone good with that one?
So, sorry, were you saying development projects requesting significant? Is that where you want?
Yes.
Okay.
I policy RS for where we at? Report out of what?
Right to 9.
12 resources and then 3 and 4 resources.
That's okay. First, you always go slow.
The warm up. Are we in warm up?
You're warmed up.
All right.
Risk of wildfire and associated hazards while improving the health, structure, condition, function, and resilience of forest resources through best practices of forestry and wildland fires. Don't buy anyone.
Okay, so I was part of I worked with Geronimo on the fire in the alluvial fans that basically saved Sunnyside and a lot of that area. So if you say mitigate the risk, broad term, and very broad,
Yeah.
mitigate. Like,
Yeah, I do want, I mean, I guess kind of how I felt too. It's
yeah,
it's
like what do you
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
saying? So maybe something more along the line of take appropriate step. I don't know how to even
How
word
about
that.
reduce the
because-
risk?
Reduce the risk, okay. And then how do you do that?
I'm sorry, I missed
And
that.
I guess
Could
I
you
have-
say that again? What was your recommendation?
Well, mitigate the risk means what? It's a very broad,
You're saying reduce or?
well, and
Lower.
Diane said basically the right
Okay.
word. I'm
I
just
just
trying to
didn't-
get it out of my head because I didn't make any sense.
I agree.
But I was just, that's my question was, and this is probably based off my ignorance, but isn't mitigate an action thing?
Yeah, I guess reduce is just a little stronger.
Can I ask
I mean, we can mitigate the risk without reducing the risk.
I guess the question about for fire staff is reduce possible.
You guys can do it, right?
Yeah, what makes the most sense on this? I
I
forget the
personally,
word.
Mark Adams, with Wildland Fire Management, I personally feel like mitigate is a common terminology that we use, when we're talking about trying to make our community more resilient, adapted to wildfire. Mitigate is essentially reducing our risk.
Yeah, I'll jump into, my name's Dylan Geffen, the wildfire operations captain with the City of Flagstaff Fire Department. And when you read through a lot of other supporting documents, such as the fire adapted communities, the learning network that they have, the terminology that they use throughout almost all those documents is mitigate. So in order for it to be more cohesive with some of the other things that this is looking like it's trying to align with, I would probably keep it as mitigate would be my suggestion.
I go with it.
I'll certainly go along with that because I live right in the middle of one of those hazards where it would, down the Copeland Wash, Road Arabian, and all of the other side. So mitigation is the term that I am familiar with and have used, and it's quite appropriate.
Want to see it be a little bit more forceful.
It's just so broad and I can appreciate what they're saying because working in the documents with the forestry, it does say mitigate all the way through, but there's usually something right behind it or in front of it that sort of more defined. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with it honestly, but it's pretty broad. Any suggestions, guys, or you're just saying mitigate?
I think if you look further into it, into your implementation guideline, you have prioritizing forestry treatments, which that is your action
That's
to the mitigation, right? That's one of your actions that you can take is the mitigate of the forest treatments. So I think with mitigate up there in your implementation guideline, you're capturing what that action word is of mitigate in the policy.
The other thing that goes with that is mitigation is like the right description when you are working with other agencies, Corps of Engineers, Forest Service, and at best, Forest Service, Corps of Engineers, mitigation is what you described. We don't always get what we want, and we can't entirely prevent. So that's terminology.
So so Susie put in the chat that we should add mitigate to the glossary if it's not already there. And this is a good, I know we're talking a lot about adding things to the definitions, but some terms like mitigate mean different things in different contexts. In a chapter where we're talking about fire, I would pull the FEMA definition of mitigation. If I were in a different chapter, I might use a different definition of mitigation. So some of these terms, I don't know if adding it to the chapter, like it will always make sense to add it to the glossary, because I think we sometimes have to accept that there's a clean English sounding word that in different professional contexts has different meaning. Mitigating something in landscape architecture looks different than mitigating something in wildland fire. And so staff always takes that context into account when we are looking at that. I don't go wonder what mitigate means. I go and talk to Mark and Dylan and their staff and say, what does mitigation mean in this context if we have questions?
I do think now that I can actually focus in on that and read that a little bit better, you're not mitigating a risk. You're mitigating a hazard. So you can mitigate hazards to reduce your risk. Maybe that's where we change the wording there.
So you'd say mitigate hazards and reduce the risk of uncharacteristic.
To reduce.
You manage risk. In wildfire safety world, you manage risk. And mitigate and manage are used pretty much synonymously. So if mitigate is a word that you don't like, manage might work.
Well, it could say, yeah, you can either say manage the risk of uncharacteristic fires or say mitigate hazards to manage the risk of uncharacteristic fires.
To reduce your risk.
To reduce. or
To
manage.
John's point, though, you have to use something that can go along everyone's genre and all the words from county, the city to, and I have to agree with that. If you get too weird, then you can't take that word and use it to county, city, fire.
Well, anybody that's involved in risk management is gonna know that.
Yeah.
You don't mitigate risk, you mitigate the hazards to change your risk outcome.
There you go.
Reduce your risk, so
Okay, there-
hazards are the thing that you can play with to get the desired risk outcome.
What was the current wording you had, sir?
Well, there's two choices. Mitigate hazards to reduce the risk of uncharacteristic wildfires or mitigate hazards to manage the risk of uncharacteristic fires.
Oh, I have another one.
Okay.
That essentially, manage the risk of wildfire, mitigate the associated hazards involved or as a consequence, while improving health structure condition that's there.
I think that's the same there, it's just.
Yeah.
I like the first one, which is the
Me too.
mitigate the hazards to reduce the risk, but it gets reduce in there, which is a more forceful.
Second that motion. That'll work.
And then I would delete the and associated hazards.
The implementation guideline, anyone have any comments on that?
I had one.
Yeah.
Comment. I would recommend that we add to the guidelines, expand and improve wildfire suppression capabilities. We're talking about forest treatment and so forth, which is absolutely essential. But when we have a fire in our area, we want to expand and improve our abilities to suppress that wildfire. There are lots of ways that we can do that.
So I have a question, to Steph, Mark, or Dylan on that point. I don't really see a problem with that at all. I just wonder, how much suppression is actually done or necessary in sometimes these fires, I mean, historically, they're celebrated, encouraged.
There are certain times where suppression is gonna absolutely be the number one choice to mitigate our hazards or reduce our risk, depending on time of year. I think one way to think about it, and Dylan and I have been talking about, is you can't, in order to fulfill that RS4 statement, there's three things that we should be looking at doing. And one is resilient landscapes, which you guys have addressed in there. Next is fire adapted communities, and that's, getting our community our homes more hardened, our properties more treated for wildfire that wildfire risk. And then the third one is improve our preparedness in response and recovery. So I would say maybe think about having all three of those.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. You said improve our preparedness. I think that terminology is better than what was proposed by Tom? Or do you think both of them kind of work good together?
Well, I think preparedness doesn't exactly tie into wildfire response. Because the response is the action to the event already happening, and the home hardening can be done ahead of time to prepare for that. So you're kind of looking at two different things there.
But I like preparedness and response as opposed to suppression, because behind your thought, right, is the idea that suppression is what got us into trouble.
Not every fire is going to be put out.
Yeah.
Nor should it.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I think you're talking about suppression in two different areas. If you're out in the open forest and so forth, where wildfire or a fire does a constructive thing, that's fine. But if you're in a Lahaina type situation where you've got a wildfire that's turned into a firestorm roaring towards your town, then you want to do what you can to suppress it.
Yeah, but that would also suggest that we don't already have the resources to suppress fires.
Yeah, we don't.
Well,
we have. Let me give you some
history that I've seen of local fires that are close to town. They seem to, I mean, as much smoke as they put off, they seem to be put out pretty quickly. The ones that are a little farther away.
Okay, we have 2 water tenders for the county. So a fire truck shows up on the scene of a wildfire. It has, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, gentlemen, it has 1 to 2 minutes of water.
I'll correct you on that.
Okay, how much water does one of the fire?
A fire engine typically carries 500 to 1,000 gallons of water.
I think it's 500 or less.
Okay, let's talk about a type 6 engine then. There's 5, 6, 7 kinds of engines. A big red truck is a type 1 engine, 500 to 1,000 gallons. Type 3 engine is a mid-sized, still big truck, 500 to 750 gallons. Type 6 engine, which would be your normal brush truck size truck, carries maybe up to 400 gallons.
So how many minutes of pumping is there? How many minutes can you put out water with that?
6 gallons a minute out of type 6 out of the nozzle, maybe 30 gallons at a time. It'll last a long time.
I've been told it lasts 1.5 to 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's where
Let's move on.
I do want to say that well, please remember this is resource stewardship and resilience. There is another chapter of the plan called infrastructure and public safety. And so, like many topics, we might not have to resolve this here, but it might be worth maybe capturing something in the parking lot on what.
So I mean, I think we had the comments from our friends at Fire that we want to talk about
say the words.
Resilient landscapes, fire adaptive communities.
Fire adaptive communities, that's one of
and appropriate, safe and effective wildfire response.
Okay.
Do you
Those
think-
are the 3 goals of the national cohesive strategy for wildland fire.
Michelle, do you have a specific comment?
Yes, I can be succinct. Absolutely. So I'm asking for a point of clarification because what I heard Tom say was that we wanted to increase the resources, which means increase the budget for. And I thought those were decisions that went to council. Because we talked at some point about increasing or getting a ecologist on, a plant ecologist to deal with invasive species. And I was told that's up to the council. So how does this, is it the same? I mean, we can talk about this, but the wording Tom suggested wouldn't be appropriate here, right?
Well, let's, if we, since we put it in the bottom line, we're gonna talk about it as public safety, let's address that.
Well, yeah, but I'd like to know for the future if things that require funding are not to be going in here.
In the strategies section, we can talk
In a strategy, we can't.
generally about saying we need to provide resources for.
Right, good.
But we can't say, or we need strategies that, but we can't say fund a position. We cannot in the plan say hire 4 more type 6 fighting trucks and staff them for brush fire and fire suppression. That is too specific. If you want to say increase the resources for preparedness and response in partnership with blah, 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 that is a strategy that you can look to add. I did have a clarifying question for Mark and Dylan. Is there something about the resilient landscapes and fire adapted communities that should be an implementation guideline here? Because those, to me, seem like they may fit RS4, but the preparedness and response maybe goes to public safety, or should all 3 of those things go to public safety? I just needed that clarification, right?
I think, yeah, I think if you're keeping this policy related to like forest treatments and planning, which is what's in your guideline, then I think you're fine with what you've got, because the National Acute Adhesive Strategy, all that stuff falls underneath best practices of forestry and wildland fire science. So you're capturing that information and that portion of that. And if this is just for the forest health side of things, good here, especially if you're going to capture response and forest resiliency or home hardening and the public safety part of it.
I'll add home hardening here so that that's clear.
Yeah, that home hardening part, that would fall under your fire adaptive community.
Yeah, and that just doesn't feel like that's a natural resource thing to me.
No.
I think it's important.
I do have a description of fire adapted communities in the background section for that. Is that more appropriate to move to public safety as well? If we're moving that conversation there. Happy to do it.
How do you feel about that, huh?
Well, I'm definitely in favor of the fire adapted communities. There's no question about that. I just feel that it's really essential that we make it clear that we need to improve our wildfire suppression capability. I don't know what phraseology you want to use, but we definitely don't want to become another Lahaina because we didn't have the proper or the best possible wildfire suppression capability. One of the other things that I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the county has 2 tenders, 2 water tenders for the county, one on the west side, one on the east side. And that's a very limited capability to get extensive water on the fire. Another thing that we have is an administrative issue at the airport to get firefighting aircraft positioned at Pulliam Airport. Having a wildfire type 1 wildfire helicopter at Pulliam would be amazing during wildfire season. We could get 1,000 gallons, I think it's 1,000 gallons, 1,000 gallons of water over a fire in minutes. And I was at a briefing by the chief recently at a community meeting where he said, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that you have minutes to be on offense with a fire. You have minutes to be on offense with a fire. If you get the right equipment and the right manpower on the fire, you have minutes to stay on offense. And then then when that time is up, those minutes are up, the fire's taken over and you're on defense. You're trying to protect the adjacent properties that the fire is on its own. So the key in my mind is rapid response with appropriate equipment and manpower. And if we do that, we can not have or really reduce the probability of having, the tremendous wildfires that we've had recently.
This sounds good, Tom. We're deep in the weeds now. But, I think if you keep this, going throughout the other chapters where it's also appropriate, I think it'll be a good discussion to have again, because just your point alone has spawned such a robust and fruitful discussion in the art of compromise. Diana?
I think this is just a parking lot, but I don't know when we talk about the placement of subdivisions in the wildland urban interface and how we keep people out of harm's way.
that falls into your fire adaptive community.
Correct. I just don't know
So
when
moving
in the,
codes
right.
and, you know, where you place your homes and then your existing structures, improving how they're built.
Okay, yeah, let's move on to the next one. So we can down on this, as far as so create resilient and sustainable flood management practices and systems that are coordinated with federal and state agencies and protect and enhance ecosystem and human health throughout the region.
I got something on that.
Go for it.
Okay, so if we're doing sustainable flood management practices in city or county lands, I would prefer not to have to coordinate with state and federal agencies on that work. So is the idea here that that it's for state lands and Forest Service lands to have this? Like, that's the idea here, to coordinate, to have that work done on those lands?
That is one of several ways it's been done in the past, but we also have had times where we needed state or federal funding.
Oh, for sure, funding
So-
for it.
And once you accept federal funding, you're coordinating with the other government.
No, I don't want to have this requirement of having to work with federal and state agencies for every flood management practice and system that we do in our region.
So should that be an implementation guideline instead, that it's more specific about when and how to coordinate with state and federal agencies for?
Perhaps.
Just a note on that. This is exactly what the county has done over the years, starting with the Schultz fire, and the pipeline, and then the tunnel fires, which missed me by 60 feet. So I know what it's like. It comes time to say, we will avoid this. This basically sums up what the county has done starting back in 2010. And it could not have been done without working with Corps of Engineers, Forest Service, State Land Department, and numerous other entities. So I think in stating this, you're stating reality that's already occurred. And I know at the county level, it'd be very difficult to say, oh, we don't need to say, you need to work with other agencies and entities in accomplishing this.
That's not the intent. The intent here is that this is so broadly stating it, saying anything that we do, we have to do this engagement. And I just want to be clear that like there are local and both county and city practices that guide those. And so if the idea is that it's related to funding or if it's related to work on those lands, I'm just trying to make sure it's clear about.
Keep in mind that as a
The
policy
oversight.
document, it is a recommendation. And if the city looks at this and says, well, there's part of it that we can't do, or we're not going to do, oh, well and good, go forward that way. But in terms of putting it in as something that is one, the policy that is aspirational. I have to look at this in terms of what happens when it comes to us on the planning and zoning commission of the county, and then forward to the board of supervisors. And I think this is an excellent statement. The facts of the matter as they exist right now and how it has been done, and what has worked.
John, and Julie, I was just asking, I'm sorry, I was just wondering, can you see like her statement as an escape hatch? Like, and the way we have it, and?
Not at all. As long as you've got the statement.
I'm wondering if, people's have mental images that are like a scale issue. So are you concerned that in whatever work you might do, you run into regulations related to floodplains that may now require you to talk to the state and fed, when in reality you have no immediate relationship to those? Is that how you read this? That's the problem.
I might just suggest to break this up into individual sentences. It seems to try a mouthful here. How about create resilient and sustainable flood management practices and systems, period.
Yep.
Coordinate with federal and state agencies where applicable, period. protect and enhance ecosystems and human health throughout the deleted area. I know Julie has intimate knowledge as an engineer working with all agencies in flood control, and I don't claim to understand all the different layers, but I think I feel your concern where it's like, hey, if we don't need to interface with all these people, why make a statement where it seems to indicate that we need to interface with all these people, so that where applicable is kind of my escape hatch of like, well, it makes sense, do it, but you don't need to, don't do it.
Adding some periods to the order of consensus, I like that, not trying to keep.
One of the rules for the policy, however, is that it should be one sentence.
Ah.
So I'm fine.
What about the semicolon?
Semicolons are fine. Got it.
That's really
Famous. Love those guys.
So Julie, you're wanting to remove the handcuffs basically from that statement a little bit, right? Because to your point, may not always be that
They're
way.
fantastic partners, but that's not how every project is done and delivered.
So comments? To John's point.
Does it make it though that then we just kind of turn it into because we just say as needed, so as needed, which strikes me that is it because the point of it is more that we would like federal and state agencies to do more when they are the people who are driving the process because it's federal or state land.
Yes, that's the question here. So for the natural resources section, are we
Yeah.
saying it's
Mm.
federal and state land that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean,
And
I
I
don't
don't-
know to see us. Best practices.
So my suggestion would be that we turn, so a guideline is usually something that like you do it most of the time, but when you don't need to do it, you don't do it, right? So because we really, guidelines are things that they 80 to 90% of the time, they might be what we do, but there are also exceptions. So if it's something we think doesn't apply to all pieces, I'd say let's move it to a guideline and explain more clearly what we need to know, rather than try and stay brief and include it in the policy.
Can you do that also?
Somehow it does say that are
Yeah.
coordinated,
That's the
doesn't,
compromise I
there's
would
not a,
offer, if that's acceptable to
Yeah.
everybody.
So we look at that one.
It's not.
And I'll be happy to send out like a little email so people can see it.
RS 6, do we want to take a 5-minute break?
Yeah, probably.
good idea.
We'll just take a 5-minute break for folks online.
So we're at 6 out of 12, and then we've got
More.
3 and cultural resources.
We have 9 more, we've got 6.
Yeah.
And we've done that in an hour and a half.
An hour.
Yeah.
The first half
You
hour
guys just
being
stay here,
busy.
or you could stick on the whole thing.
Some more on this thing.
Oh, more stuff.
First time. Yeah.
I think, you know,
First time.
that, I mean. I think that should. Hey.
So I can see it now.
I mean, I guess.
Or not to get ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
And
I
I
mean.
mean,
I know, you know.
But
yeah,
No.
no, I have
So many.
Maybe using the word suppression is bad.
that was interesting. That
Right, that historic thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they.
Anyway.
I mean,
And I.
I like the idea of. Don't.
So
Go really fast.
Try to move this back a little harder. You got a long way to go and a short time to get there.
Ready, everyone? Hope you enjoyed your break. We're gonna jump right back in. So we are right now on policy RS6, which is support. It's a long one. This is the longer one yet. This is all one sentence.
Yeah.
Support healthy watersheds that are prepared for changing climatic conditions through the preservation and restoration of natural watercourses, protection and enhancement of riparian vegetation, prevention of water pollution, development of resilient stormwater infrastructure, stormwater harvesting, and other best management practices. Any comments, anyone? I like it.
I do too.
I mean, this probably is long, but I like it. Is it too long?
No.
No.
Professor says.
The professor said no, yeah. Everyone with a PhD in zoology. said just for
Anyone want any changes to this one? I'd be happy to move right along. Yeah.
Move it along.
Cool. Okay. Moving on, R7. Recognize and incorporate indigenous knowledge and cultural practices into natural and cultural resource projects and issues. What is the ICF 2020?
the Indigenous Circle of Flagstaff was a roundtable process that the city manager's office led to hear from Indigenous community members. I wonder if Rose Toey is still on and can explain that with more detail. Rose, are you still listening in? Oh, yeah. I'll say we're off mute, right? Yeah. Yeah, okay. Be able to hear us. Let me just check. Rose, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was trying to undo my mute.
That's okay. Could you better and more detailed explain what Indigenous Circle of Flagstaff 2020 process was?
Okay, so I think with the natural areas that this is talking about, this is the part where I know that ICF wanted to have more input into how that is structured. And I'm not sure if this is the part where we're also talking about, are we still talking about fire?
Well, we're talking about all natural and cultural resources.
Okay. All right. So I know that there are some pieces where we talked about the fire and about indigenous cultural burning type scenarios. And then also maybe having more educational type things regarding you know, how to approach natural places and also natural resources in whatever, you know, whatever way that we're talking about with this plan. And then just having that knowledge base to be more prevalent throughout the planning and what we do in the natural part of our land and those kinds of things. So I hope I'm hitting that right. I know it's been a while since, you know, we specifically talked about exactly this point, but I know it's very important just to have some more of the input as far as indigenous knowledge and cultural practices to anything that's natural, anything that is you know, regarded as precious resources. So that's what I can give you for right now.
Any other comments, folks, on policy? Comments on the implementation guideline? For me, this one doesn't read the same as all the others.
The guideline?
Yeah. We haven't put, for example, anywhere else, and the first sentence, I don't know, doesn't. It sort of references the document as opposed to referencing the implementation guidelines, so it's not clear to me what that is, how that is guiding me to implement anything.
Yeah, good point. And I think the policy itself was clear and
Yeah.
we should adopt it, but what does the guideline have? I'm not sure. If we deleted it, would it change it? It's a question.
Is that your suggestion?
I don't think it adds anything as is, but if it's,
Go down.
I think it's kind of before, if there was an intention there that I'm missing, I don't want to.
I think that it was added because there were people who questioned what the policy meant and wanted a deeper level of what does that mean? How do we incorporate indigenous knowledge? And so the language you came up with was that you're doing some kind of natural resource planning, you should be aware of your cultural competency and trying to build them related to the topic you're working on. But that's not the only way to describe it, and maybe it's not necessary if everyone here thinks it's clear enough.
Broad enough. And that's okay. I think it's
Could you
important.
say cultural competency and natural resource planning will be included in every part of this policy or of this section?
And would authenticity be better than competency? Or no? We don't have.
Yeah. Totally in favor of the policy.
Yeah, I do like the idea that the implementation guideline is that cultural competency should be,
Yeah, to say that it already is probably false. It should be.
Yeah, it should be,
You know,
yeah.
say it is, well, that's probably a true statement.
but it should be addressed through the implementation of every policy in this section. It shouldn't be in every policy, otherwise we're just referencing back to the writing.
So is your proposal that it changed to cultural competency in natural resource planning should be addressed through the implementation of policies in this section?
Yeah. And we take out the example.
Okay.
Everyone good?
Good.
Verse 9, incorporate the protection, conservation, and restoration of significant natural resources in the development of regulations and property acquisition, particularly sensitive and uncommon habitats and landscape scale that support the health and resilience of regional wildflower and plant populations and ecosystems.
I think the scale is
That's
something that should
trouble
have
reading
been.
that, those.
Yeah, I think the track changes left the scale in there when it should have been off. So sorry. I think it should have been and landscapes that support. Sometimes when we got too many people tracking changes, it gets weird.
Comments, everyone?
So I know that's why I don't hand out track changes versions. Can I just make a comment that we have a current map of significant natural resources. We need, one of the things I put in the memo is we need to look at remapping this because the map is not. I took a deep dive in the metadata behind this map, and I know folks like SOT and the conservation study forum spent a lot of time in it. And I think I have some ideas of how it can be redone. One of my personal issues with the map that shows significant natural resources is that the areas in gray, some of them have no data and some of them have no resources, and there's no difference between the two, and that makes it very hard to interpret where there is not available data. However, when you look at the metadata, it's not easy to do that on one map. So I think we need to really look and make sure this map communicates clearly in the spaces between where resources are mapped, like what we intend, because that's where there's been confusion is folks have said, well, it shows I have no resources on my property. And I said, well, it could be that we have no data on resources in your property. And maybe you have resources, it may be not. So that kind of thing has made this map very difficult to implement, and it ties directly to this policy. So this policy and this map are related. And so one of my requests was, is there a desire, if the policy's fine, then are there people who on the committee who want to help me with seeing the iterations of how we might take this map information and display it so it's clearer and more true to the metadata behind what this is.
Sure.
Oh, I'm raising my hand to be one of the people.
I'll be two of the people.
I'll be three. I'll be three.
I will, I don't. These things I kind of actually do, but I tell myself I didn't. The only, I did have a comment on this one, but on the map specifically was that I wanted to make sure that where there was interpolation between the data that we have, that we're making sure that we do that carefully because we're taking rather large swaths of area, right? I mean, kind of making light brown, but these actually get used in referencing decisions, you know, that are at the scale of a specific parcel. So we don't want to paint too broad a brush if we're actually talking about something that's pretty small.
And it does do that right now. So for rare plants, it takes the terrestrial ecosystem unit, which is a measure of soil, like the soil type that's identified by the Forest Service, and it says these soil types support the rare plant, but not every place of that soil type has the conditions for the rare plant. And it also, the NRCS code, so the Natural Resource Conservation Service code for a similar soil type that could also support the rare plant is not mapped. And no one can tell that by looking at the map until you spend a week in the metadata. And some of that is data availability and the ability to cross-reference those things. So don't want to get into too much detail tonight. But if anybody wants to dive down that rabbit hole with me, and we'll come back to the map in a couple meetings. When we just started, I thought it would be kind of easy to take this map and update it, and then could not quickly do that. Not authentically and with good information.
So I guess there as well that I put another is that we work to make sure that we're only including the data and the information that's relevant to places where we're actually take action. Right, so if it's kind of not mentioned in any of our policies here, then it doesn't need to be on the map. Okay, but back to the policy. Any comments, anyone? RS9. Right. I'm kind of I'm not certain about the property acquisition. Is that specifically referencing acquisition by the city or the county?
Correct.
Alrighty, real good. Is there people in the one sir? Because I think we don't change this.
Yes.
I don't know about but this is a really big net. What's going on with it, but I'm very also interested.
Right. So I have Michelle, Tina, Diane, and Anthony. Was there anyone online who's interested in between meetings with me about the map? If so, please put it in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, implementation guidelines. We get asked because this is the only one with more than one. So further refine the city of Flagstaff resource protection overlay to prioritize the highest value resources in the context of efficient land use and hazard mitigation.
So this implementation guideline is something, and a paragraph that's earlier in the document as well, I have talked about for 2 pages or so in the comments. I don't know if you guys read that, but I'm really concerned about something that's said earlier in this document that we haven't looked at, is that the resource protection overlay has unintentionally contributed to the affordable housing emergency. And then I see this implementation guideline seems to reference back to that. And I have a lot of concerns about saying that, and actually suggest that we remove that implementation guideline completely. Because I can go into more detail, but that's it in a sentence. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that feedback. Could I offer that we table the complete removal of it and then maybe offer to meet with you and whoever else to maybe show you some sites? And maybe affordable housing isn't the right word when we say like it intentionally caused the affordable housing crisis. But I think we see from different applications that come before it that it has greatly restricted our ability to get the maximum density and to get density. So can we show you some projects and talk about it? And maybe there's some better words, but I would suggest not removing it.
Yeah,
maybe not removing it, but can we look through that one?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I assumed it was related to maybe what you guys are discovering with the cap.
Exactly.
And
I mean, no,
because I've never heard this before.
what we're discovering with the cap is that it's reinforcing what we heard anecdotally from developers who have said we can't do this because of these things. And we are actually, and that's part of why we're doing the code analysis, is to understand.
Sure.
Okay, is what we're hearing true from a third party? And it is, so yeah.
Yeah, see, we haven't seen anything you guys have produced with that yet.
Not yet,
So,
but maybe-
right, not yet, not yet.
No, if you don't mind, let's do that.
Yeah, I'm fine with talking to them about it, because the way it's worded, it just,
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be backed by any support either, any evidence. And maybe that could be added. I mean, no, you have it, but the public doesn't have it.
I think that it has been mentioned in quite a few rezoning staff reports that they were not able to achieve a higher density. I definitely know I have stood up at city council and talking about plan conformance when, as the affordable housing emergency has been coming forward, and they said, well, why can't we get something closer to what the regional plan says the maximum for this area should be? And we say, well, the other constraints on the zoning on the site prevent us from adding more density here. So I think that that actually has been on the public.
Okay, well, I don't read them all.
I know, but
I read a lot of them, but not them all. But also the overlay process allows for affordable housing to have less of those resources. So maybe the use of the word affordable housing made me think 80% or less. That's like 10% of any development if we're lucky, right?
I think
the numbers didn't add up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a reference to, the references should be to the densities as opposed to the affordable housing.
Right. Exactly.
I think that reference is there because the 10-year affordable or the 10-year housing plan mentions that these parts of the zoning code to be looked at again.
Right, but right, but how does that fit in with everything that you're doing in CAP? Are we gonna go and pick little things out from CAP and put them in here? Or are we gonna wait for the whole thing to be in CAP and then each of those taken through the process of amendments? To me, that seems to be what I've been told. You told us that last month,
Right.
the process, right?
Right.
So why would we put that in here now?
Well, so that, and again, that isn't because of the CAP project.
Right.
That is because of what we're actually seeing in these projects. So I think affordable housing was a word choice. We probably should have said.
I've been accused of
Using
using that term when I'm not supposed
The densities was fine, but I think I know Julie had read that, so.
Yeah, we would
But-
really like to talk, myself and Susie
Okay,
Harrington would really like to talk to you about that.
perfect.
Okay, great.
So on the natural resources section here, so not specific to the affordable housing, I think this flexibility is really important. With the resource protection overlay and being able to have the flexibility to prioritize something like a particular ecosystem or spring where, you know, with resource protection, you're doing a tally and a list and you have to say exactly this many trees, and something might be more valuable in development and you want the flexibility to be able to say, well, this spring over here, this ecosystem or this wetland or whatever it is, we can give on the resource protection on the points to be able to capture that. And I see that in development applications.
Very good.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, this thought of an example, right, up the street from my house, there's a meadow, so beautiful wildflowers, you know, yeah, in the monsoon, and there's a big out migration path as well, that has no trees. So if you were company to come in and develop that, the code would encourage you to develop on the untreed meadow area, stay off the, you know, the tree sloped area. But in reality, if you wanted to protect the, you know, the more precious resource, you wanted to.
So I see that in this context.
Could we add natural resources to that? Because when I read resources, I thought maybe this was going to be a competition between affordable housing and wildlife habitat, for instance.
Oh, I see.
So,
Back to the human resources question that I asked.
yeah, so
No,
that's
a
another,
good distinction. It
yeah.
is natural resources.
Right.
I don't know if, I don't want to put fire on the spot, but do you guys want to speak to the unintended
Yeah,
hazards? Because
sure.
I think there has been that.
Absolutely. I deal with resource protection overlay issues quite often. When people are trying to firewise their property. And occasionally it could be a neighbor dispute where the neighbor doesn't want their neighbor next door to firewise their property and take down trees. And if they're in the resource protection overlay, they'll wave that flag where their property is completely overgrown and is a wildfire risk. You want to see a poster child for the problems with resource protection overlay? There's a property right across from the emergency room on San Francisco. It's like an older building.
Oh,
It's this really weird building and there's trees all over the place. And they planted a lot of trees. Somebody recently bought that property and they want to firewise it. But it ended up on my desk because of the resource protection overlay, and that 2-acre parcel is a nightmare. And I deal with it a lot where people are requesting firewise and their HOA is pushing back on them because of the resource protection overlay. And the thing that I don't want to have happen is that somebody wants to firewise their property, make it more resilient, and they hit a roadblock and they just put their hands up and they say, nah, I'm not gonna go through that. So I feel like the resource protection overlay could use an overhaul. It's pretty old. We're surrounded by the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world. And if we're gonna assign points to ponderosa pines on people's private property that are dumping pine needles into their roof and into their gutters and creating a kind of a nightmare situation, in my opinion, we may need to rethink it.
A quick question to you, Mark, while we're on the topic. I think you're kind of going in that direction, but for lack of better terms, this is just what I heard, you know, is the city of Flagstaff a
Yeah, it depends on the day. I mean, one bad afternoon and we have some serious problems.
So changing or keeping this the same or keeping it as is will help. Will help, you guys be able to manage that.
I think re-looking at the resource protection overlay and addressing some of these unintended consequences. I think it was written in the 90s.
2011.
Maybe.
And then it was updated.
Okay.
It was originally written.
Yeah. Like I said, I just, I'd hate to have somebody want to do the right thing for wildfire mitigation and then just put their hands up because they're worried about zoning and they don't want to go through the effort.
And I'm not sure and I don't know the history, but it may not have been developed with the thought of fire-wising.
Yeah.
That's you know, around the buildings.
Yeah.
And so that might be a logical exception.
Oh,
Because you
yeah.
don't want that. to
It
happen,
hasn't
but-
been a problem at all. I've gone and taken photos and,
Yeah.
you know, said, go ahead and cut that tree down. But how many people haven't even approached me or gone through the process because they hit this zoning, this code issue, and they're just like, they won't let me do it. I'm just gonna leave it there.
I thought this was only applying to greenfield development. Am I wrong about that?
You are wrong about that.
Okay.
And,
I read
respectfully,
that somewhere in
it,
here.
So it applies to any, at the time, any lot that was over 5 acres, for the
Oh, okay.
most part, had the RPO overlay put onto it. So
Mhm.
if I have a development and I'm going to expand it or I'm going to tear it down and redevelop it, it applies to me. So it applies
Yeah.
to every development that is under that overlay.
And development would that apply to this 2 acres that he's talking
Yes.
about?
Yeah.
Development is,
Yeah.
the building's already there.
Yeah, I just
Yeah,
had
but
one
it's
on,
under the resource protection overlay.
Okay. Good.
So it really has nothing to do with the existing structure, it has to do with the zoning.
Yeah, right.
And so anything existing now is.
Right, I swear I read somewhere that it was greenfield.
I'll
Something
double-
I've been looking at here or on the zoning said
It's
greenfield, so it made me think it was a small, a section of Flagstaff, but not like all of Flagstaff.
It's
Like it would
scattered all
apply to that.
throughout.
It's more than 70% of Flagstaff. I think
Yeah.
we looked at that. RPO, yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty much everything except the interior downtown Milton. Those
Right.
areas. And so,
Okay, I thought, yeah.
so I think it sounds like there are some misconceptions about the RPO. And I know that Michelle has said she's willing to kind of
We're willing to
do more
walk you-
education.
We're willing
Yeah, I
to
think
show
that's
you
a
the
good
different
idea.
developments, even take you on the site to think about light fire.
I'd love to go with you.
Yeah.
Because it sounds
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a very rich.
Right,
Yeah.
and it's that,
I'd like to understand.
also
If people
it's,
want to go with us, just send me an email and rather than all putting our hands up now, you can send me an email and I will give all the emails to Michelle to coordinate them.
right, and so,
Yeah.
with your parents. Yeah. So it's like, to me, it seems like a potential conflict between protection of wildlife habitat in some cases and fire, and some middle ground needs to be reached, right?
Yeah.
Where we can do both, not throw out the trees with the bathwater, just, you know, but have some combination.
That's what we said, refine it and not get rid of it.
Yeah.
It's very important, but we think it needs.
Right.
Every day.
And Julie's point, I would like to say earlier, was also one that staff has discussed before, that it's designed, there's a maximum amount of resources you can protect on a site under the resource protection overlay, and you may or may not get the highest ecological value out of that calculation. And there are times where I think staff and those in the private development world have thought, well, if I could just preserve this really special thing in a smaller portion of the site, it would actually be more ecological value rather than following the more complicated calculation. But we don't have the flexibility in the code built in to let staff negotiate that. And so that's an example of why having more staff discretion or a different approach could assist in reaching this goal of having this kind of protection be meeting our community standards. So that's just a piece, I want to make sure everybody, so I'm gonna leave it, but I'll put in the parking lot, follow-up education.
Alrighty, guys, so the next implementation guideline we have here is use the Arizona Department of Game and Fish Wildlife Linkages data to identify, conserve, and restore important and sustainable wildlife corridors that support wildlife movement across the planning area and the state that are designed to remain functional as climate change occurs. Sorry, climate changes.
On the existing RPO, are the lines, it wasn't in the legend, but are the lines, the wildlife corridors, the big black lines?
Sorry, the natural resources map.
The significant natural
Yeah.
resources map. Yes, the wildlife for linkages are kind of the grayish or the tannish color. So like, I'll stand up and do this. So like this area right here around Mount Eldon's a wildlife corridor, the one coming out to Rogers Lake and the Observatory Mesa, this is the one that comes down from the mountain. There's a few across Campbell Mesa here in the Picture Canyon. So it's this, it is very fuzzy, and so it's hard to distinguish with the way it is mapped. Correct, but those are the wildlife linkages. The data is also available on Arizona Game and Fish's website.
The sentence is just a little rough around the edges and the
Okay.
So this is a new or old, this implementation guideline.
I would say this is this is kind of a whole new thing that we've not really addressed before, right?
I mean, we've had the wildlife linkages in the plan since 2014. It's just not been very clear what to do with them.
Oh, I've never noticed.
Yeah, they're very subtle on the map, but they've been there. It has been difficult to determine what to do with them in some cases because, like for instance, they are, they are tied to a certain type of animal too. So like when you click on a corridor in Arizona Game and Fish mapping, not in our mapping, but in theirs, it'll say this is a corridor for elk, which tells you this is a corridor for large mammals that are moving through this place. And then other places it will tell you this is for foxes and coyotes, which has a whole different migration set of needs in terms of their habitat. So the map is not really descriptive, but there is further data. And that's what I mean by the metadata. It tells us this map is insufficient to actually explain what you should do with it. And that's why it needs a little more work. It was a good first cut. We hadn't had something like this before at all when we were in 2014, but it's had some problems being implemented.
Yeah, any other comments?
Well, I guess, I mean, I worked in wildlife linkages for decades, big part of what I did. And I remember when they came out with this particular map, I thought, this is not how, it doesn't tell me what I'm thinking. You know, to me, a corridor goes from one thing to another. They put out this map that, I remember commenting to this is what the things were doing, you know, this, what are we connecting? For elk growth and where. So I guess I have some, I don't know exactly what to do. But as much as I love wildlife linkages, I'm not sure that these will great blobs or and then how do you evaluate what your impact to that corridor is if you don't know who's using it to go from where to where? So
is that something we could address?
It's like opening up a big can of worms. I don't know.
Have you looked at the original document that it's based on? Because it looks at the whole county. And so
Yeah, it's at the county.
it's at the county scale, which is pretty big. And
Yeah.
so it gives a little more of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it may not be
So
perfect, but
I
it's-
guess I'd like to think about it. I haven't 10 years ago, check out, paid attention to it. I'm happy. Aspect of it.
Want to help use the mapping conversation, Paul?
Yeah, I think we should talk about that.
Yeah.
And I'm all for wildlife. That is helpful.
so avoid and mitigate construction that impacts seeps and springs to prevent loss of spring habitat for wildlife, and red plants and to prevent damage to buildings.
I guess Fran is a great fact of that, right? They're in a wetland right there, and they had to do something to mitigate the damage within the wetlands, and we have a lot. So don't really have anything else to say about it,
Yeah. I
unless you
think
want to get more.
the issue in Flagstaff is largely that our intermittent springs, people might be constructing during a dry period and we don't know they're
They don't
constructing on a
realize it.
spring. The Thorpe Park tennis courts are a great example
Yeah.
of that. You'll notice we tore them down and rebuilt them at one point a few years ago because they were sitting on a spring and it was sublimating the foundation of the tennis courts. So that's one of the lessons we learned in the last decade is it's been dry for a few decades. People kind of forgot where that was.
Okay. Seems like everyone good with that one. Policy RS 11. Prevent, inventory, treat, and remove invasive plant species to preserve the native plant community, preserve indigenous cultural practices, and reduce the risk of impact with larger products. All right, guys, how much does invasive plant infestations create wildfire risk? Like relative to this, more on earth is gonna be really one.
I would say considerably. We have invasive grass species that are not native to this area that contribute to rapid wildfire spread, which then hampers our response efforts and suppression outcomes. So yeah, getting rid of invasive plant species is a good thing in my book.
I must say right now, the city of Flagstaff does nothing. Zero. They do 2 feet along the sidewalk. That's it. It's their invasive. So this is cool. I like it.
No, actually, I wasn't gonna say anything besides, through our beautification efforts, the things I do know is that whenever there is an opportunity to reduce invasives, and they do through the beautification program, and they actually, when citizens bring forth projects that encourage it, they usually send it.
Well, I manage some Forest Service buildings in town. I can tell you it's a top priority for them. They need us to spray around their sidewalks. They're coming off all the all the parks, and they're bringing in different seeds and different things. So they're very, very conscientious of it. Said it is a big problem. So liking it.
One more comment on what Dylan was saying. I did some research on the Lahaina fire. It turns out that the main factor there was savanna grassland overgrown that was the result of the pineapple and sugarcane fields, and those were not treated. So year after year after year, the biomass built up, and that was the fuel for the. So I think this is a good one too.
So I'm hearing all of this, and I suppose somewhat changing my mind, because when I read this, I thought of, well, I think another one when I thought of these. I thought about, like, I don't care that much about, that proposal, or whatever in someone's yard, but I do care about it on a landscape scale, right? We talked about those types of impacts. So is there a way we can ensure that it, it references that scale as opposed to,
Recording in progress.
think it might be addressed somewhat by the language here.
Wait a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Again. Sorry. we just wanted- Get it? It's gonna do it. Sorry, it's in that usually. Okay, sorry.
What we just said, are we allowed to talk now?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Yes.
Now. Sorry, apologies. I think before we started having the echo, which I didn't want to get worse, because that can be really dissonant for people who are listening online. Like I could just mentally feel people. So as you asked a question, David, before we took a little pause there about how, like, what we would determine, and that's what the implementation guideline is intended to do, is that we focus on DFFM, the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, has a list of plants of concern. And as a comment from Paul, when we were working on this draft, is that sort of the top 10 worst things that are out there on the landscape? And then there's, like bull thistle and a bazillion more that may be affecting biodiversity and some other things, but they're not the most aggressive. And we could list those, but there are new invasive species all the time, and that list could go out of currency faster than I can blink in some cases. And so I think we wanted to reference a list. And some people felt that was too restrictive to just let DFFM be the one making the call. And so we added via the comments from the group, and actually comments directly from committee members here, that also the city and county fire department could identify other plants that aren't on DFFM's list that they consider of concern for fire risk beyond just that particular piece.
That clarification addresses all. Any other comments on this one or implementation guidelines?
Just as you use the game and for wildlife, I think that University of Arizona extension on.
So we can add the cooperative extension to the list here.
The only comment I have is in the parking lot for this. Well, I think it's for this. It's related to this issue. There's discussion of the San Francisco Peaks weed management area, which includes Forest Service land. So what I thought in the strategies, right?
parking,
Yeah, strategies parking, right? So I was wondering if something about Forest Service should also be in this. And I'm not an expert on invasive species of botany, but I know the Forest Service is really concerned about invasive species. Is also trying to manage them.
Yeah,
So I don't know.
So if you have federal partners in there, you're gonna reference Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, Department of Interior, all those other agencies that have land management responsibilities. If you just put Forest Service in there, you're cutting out all those other partners.
Thank you. I see it says federal partners now. Yes. So it's broad federal partners. Great.
Cool.
Yep.
Alrighty. This is RS12. This is the last one. Before I get too excited in a second.
It's bold, really bold.
Okay.
And then there's the cultural resources one.
Well, you know how I feel about this.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that section. RS12, proactively and equitably engage community members in neighborhood level and okay, it's a mistake there. In neighborhood level and support community-wide resource stewardship and resiliency.
What does that mean?
I think the word support is generic extra. So I think if it's read proactively and equitably engage community members in neighborhood level and community-wide resource stewardship and resilience efforts, that's what it's supposed to say.
For what topic?
Yeah, what the hell does that mean?
That doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, the sustainability part is.
Genevieve's on, Genevieve, are you still, or Jenny, are you still with us?
Yeah, but there was a lot of back and forth. Can somebody repeat the question?
Yeah, I couldn't hear.
Question was, what the hell does that mean?
RS 12, what the hell does that mean?
I mean, I can take this a little bit. Yeah, I mean, there are efforts to build neighborhood resilience, so I think that fits in, but this goal is not from the carbon neutrality plan. It looks like it's from the original regional plan that we currently have, and the implementation guidelines. Yeah, I haven't seen those before. So I don't know, Jenny, do you have anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, we didn't write this.
Yeah.
I can imagine that, you know, equitable engagement is key to a resilient community, right? And you can't have one without the other. And so I imagine that's probably where it's going, but this didn't come from us, I don't think.
Yeah, I think ENC 6.1, which is the current policy in our regional plan, just talked about engaging people in like natural resource management. And we were trying to edit this to take into account the more focused effort on community engagement and resiliency efforts, like the resiliency hub system that sustainability is working on, as well as other community efforts of that sort that have sort of moved past just like, let's go have a stream team, which is what we were doing in 2010, to saying like, let's make our resources and the human interactions with them more resilient, use those opportunities that are volunteer-based for education. And then the implementation guidelines were largely about increasing the awareness of, you know, people who have been marginalized, and also making sure that we're seeking out and getting additional help with creating the environment that supports that kind of engagement with the city. And I mean, I think that is, this is, you know, one of those things, like it's in the resource stewardship and resilience chapter, and it's really about the stewardship side. Like the stewards are people in the community, and it's trying to center it somewhere in the policies here. At least that's what I remember from the conversation that led to us pulling this together and the comments that I saw on it. Because we talked about in the first section about the stuff we're conserving, but not the people doing the work.
Al, how do you feel about that?
So I don't see this thing, I mean, I would say get rid of it or take it back and rework it in some way so that it applies to a particular topic or subject. I mean, basically what this, from what I just heard, I'm guessing that that this basically says we'd love to include everybody in everything we do. Great idea. You know, it doesn't do anything. It's not a policy. It's a wish, a dream. I don't see it as, unless you can apply it to something specific, you really don't have anything here. My opinion, pure and simply, but I read that thing and I was like, what are we talking about? So I don't, you know, I mean, I say you go back to the drawing board on this baby, simply because you don't have anything to apply it to. You're if you're talking about a decisions in a particular neighborhood will include community members. I don't know, decisions about what? Growth, decisions about I mean, a lot of decisions in a particular neighborhood aren't really the neighborhoods to make. So you can bring people out. You do this now with zoning, rezoning notices. You post them within X number of feet or miles from the affected area, and it tells people that they have a chance to come forward and speak their mind on the subject. But this just basically says, you know, we'd love to have everybody. Particularly, I'm reading into it, particularly neglected communities and or marginalized communities, input on whatever we're doing, but it doesn't specify that you're doing anything. I mean, it's just like,
Yeah, we'd love to hear from everybody all the time on everything. Sorry, but that doesn't cut it as a policy.
You would agree that this needs to be told everyone, having clue what it's planning to say. But I should point out, we do have some stewardship programs right now. We have Foot Stewards program run by the state. We have Stream Stewards, a new program about a year and a half old now. There are great ways that people do engage. They are limited, however, to city-owned properties.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that, but
So we do have these stewardship programs right now, and so maybe when we go back to the drawing board, we should consider those and say, can we say anything important about them? I have not thought it through. I agree that I don't know what the hell this is trying to tell me. But when we revisit this, let's try to make it relevant to these existing programs that we have.
are there members of the group out there that see what this is supposed to do, or I mean, that disagree or say that, this maybe is a good policy? Because I'd love to hear from them.
Stop talking in order for me, I'm just kidding. But we have an entire department at the city that kind of basically follows this template. The sustainability department is working actively, and I don't know if it's because of this, as a result of this, but if it is, then that's action. Community stewardship is a significant portion of the sustainability department at this time. And I don't know if it came from this statement, but it's almost an exact replica of what the statement says. So maybe there is relevance. I don't know. I just know that.
Sarah, are you comfortable? Yeah.
I'll bring back a different version of it the next one.
Okay.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah.
This is Genevieve. Just looking at this, I mean, there is a community stewards program in the sustainability division, but when I read this, I look at this as being much more than that. I mean, we only have 11 full-time staff in the sustainability office, and there's only 2 full-time staff running the stewards program. So it doesn't encompass. There's great programs, but it's limited. Like, there's a Stream Stewards program, there's Adopt an Avenue program, there's organizing volunteer events. But when I read this statement, it seems like much, much more than just the formal programs that the sustainability division runs. And that also is not to say that we're not doing a lot, but we're only a few people in the whole community.
Let's go back and talk about it, and we'll see if we can bring back an alternative.
Okay, the next section of the document references the map, which I think we've discussed. So far, we have some action on that. So, unless anyone disagrees, we will move on to the first of the CR goals, which is cultural resources.
Are we done?
The cultural resource goal is that the Flagstaff region maintains an enduring and unique sense of place that celebrates our diverse ecosystems, the species that inhabit them, our community's heritage, and supports a high quality of life for all residents. Thoughts on that overall goal, everyone?
Just again on the wording, it's written in the present tense rather than as a goal.
Yeah.
I think it's great. Aspirational. Once it's in the active voice, yeah. That's easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thought I had when reading it was that you mentioned the diverse ecosystems and species that inhabit them, and we just had a whole much larger section that was all about ecosystems and on human species, I guess. But isn't it kind of more the human systems.
Yeah, let's be a little more of it. That is the intent.
So,
Okay.
but then the other half of me says that as well, right, that for a lot of folks, the ecosystems themselves and the species that inhabit them are the natural resources.
Let him go on.
For getting technical, can I ask the biologists, the ecosystems aren't the species that inhabit them part of the ecosystem? They don't live in the ecosystem, do they? They're part of the ecosystem. Maybe there's a different wording that would make it more accurate. Or am I wrong?
It would allow us to shorten it, which is always nice.
Happy to do it. So you would like me to delete the species that inhabit them and just have it say celebrate?
Wow. People want to go home, I can tell.
Like balls.
Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Move on to the policy. No more comments?
Yeah.
Policy CR1, this is reserved, for who?
Oh, we wrote something magical, and then as we were writing the park, open space and recreation chapter, we completely rethought it. And so there's something we wanted, that staff wanted to say here, but we actually wanted to go through and we'll come back with it when we have the related topic in parks and recreation, because we had does this belong here? Does this belong in parks and recreation? And so we just weren't ready to bring it forward. The whole point was to talk about how cultural resources in open space should be managed and kind of part of our open space system for the community. But we didn't quite get to the right wording, so we held it until we have the whole other chapter. It'll make more sense, I think.
Okay. Talking about it.
It's effectively parking lot.
We will move on to policy CR2, preserve historic buildings, sites, and structures through education, mitigation, documentation, restoration, rehabilitation, design guidelines, grants, and incentives. What is that word again?
And then under the National Historic Preservation Act to be something completely different than when you talk about FEMA mitigation. It's just a word that you need to know in context.
Does the order of the words mean anything? Like, should grant be first or anything like that? Or is it...
I consider that a style question. I think it's up to us if you'd like them reordered.
And if we're making this for the general public, as you said, Sarah, don't we need to say what the mitigation is? Because I have to confess, it's not making a lot of sense to me what we're mitigating there.
Well, the answer is it depends, so that makes it real easy to explain. It depends on architecture of the building. It depends on what kind of historic building site or artifact it is. It depends what is being done to impact it. We have a whole commission and a staff that looks at that topic on a regular basis, and so it is not easily defined, other than there's several hundred pages of technical guidance on the National Park Service website. So this is why I push back a little on, like, let's get a definition for mitigation. I couldn't define it outside of specific context and situation.
I guess we'll just.
So my one thought, Sarah, is that I'd like to see us preserve historic buildings, sites, and structures through restoration, rehabilitation, grants and incentives where possible and where not. Educate, mitigate, and document. Do you see what I'm getting?
Yeah.
That Because the education, the mitigation, and the documentation are things we do. I don't think this would harm preserve the buildings.
Well, that brings the question to me about reuse, right? We could reuse a building, right?
Sure.
And therefore you might want to preserve parts of it or at least record parts of it when you need to change it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot when you do a historic building, there are so many guidelines, it's kind of insane.
Yeah, someone
Yeah.
asked me to write them up and I'm, oh, no, can't do it. Like, it's definitely more detailed. There's, people spend their whole careers learning how to apply and do that. So, but yes, I understand that like and what I understand from Chair Hayward's comment is restoration, rehabilitation, which are Park Service words that come with a whole manual on how to do it. Grants and incentives are kind of our first choice, and that the fallback is education, mitigation, and documentation when we cannot restore, rehabilitate, provide grants and incentives. Is that what I understand?
Correct. Anyone else in the comments? Our implementation guidelines are to use the technical guidance of the National Park Service, the State Historic Preservation Office, and local ordinances to evaluate the historic significance and integrity of historic resources. Should that be cultural resources?
Sure.
Any other?
Yeah, actually, the technical guidance is provided by the Department of the Interior through the National Park Service. It is not specifically the National Park Service. I spent a lot of time working through this stuff.
Yep,
As a
also,
volunteer.
yeah,
manager, so, that's a little more specific, I think. Besides, there's more than one guideline.
There's a whole bulletin just on how to restore stained glass windows. Really good.
Right here on the computer.
And how to earthquake proof historic masonry buildings, like very detailed information. But I'd happy to add DOI in front of Park Service.
Righty, and secondly, ensure work done with grants and incentives meets the guidelines of the National Park Service from the Interior or the local commission overseeing historic preservation. It seems kind of like, duh.
Right.
We do have a local commission overseeing this.
In the city, but not in the county.
Right.
The city is a certified local government that not yet taken that step.
Consider one thing that you can use the phrase, but not limited to. And we did that a lot with the Growing Park area plans to avoid pigeonholing ourselves on that. That goes back to the discussion we had with Julie here. And I rethought that you don't want to put yourself in a box on these things. The way of doing it, we had to use a great deal was but not limited to, and we started listing organizations. Matter of fact, this does not mention the Townside Community Land Trust. In fact, if you say not limited to, when it comes down to making decisions, they can be included. You don't necessarily have to put a list that is exceptionally long in the guideline you're using. So it's something to be considered, not just here, but for down the road.
So how would you apply that? Help me understand how you'd apply that language to this guideline. Just because
You say,
it's late,
okay,
struggling.
We have a list here that says national. Well, let's use an example. Just say National Park Service, State Historic Preservation Office, and local ordinances. Technical guidance, you're saying that's all there is. So you want to say but not limited to, because you may have other organizations that you draw from, or those guidelines that you use.
In the world of historic preservation, though, those other organizations are always referencing, like there's actually in the state National Historic Preservation Act, authorities handed down from federal to state to local. Those other organizations might be advisory, but they can't write guidelines or technical guidance.
No, but what you have is a guideline
Yeah.
and a policy document.
Mhm.
So you have the latitude to use guidance from other organizations than those who specifically list. And by the way, I spent 9 years with Mansion working on exactly what you're talking about.
Well, and so I guess I do a little more of this than I should, but I struggle to think of like what organizations, like the Community Land Trust uses the National Park Service guidelines.
Not specifically, no.
Right, but when they apply to do something that needs commission approval or might get a grant or incentive, the commission has got the role of
But they are
helping
not,
them interpret
they
it.
are not restricted to that. And essentially, you're saying by listing specific organizations that you are restricting yourself to that only, but you've got to give yourself a way out or around that by saying, but not limited to these organizations.
Can I put this in the parking lot and take it to the historic preservation officer in the city and ask how relevant that is? Because
Well-
it's not my subject matter expertise, but I don't know. I've never, in the 20 years I've worked with cultural resource professionals, I've never heard that suggested, so I don't know what it would mean.
You would have enjoyed our going park area planning discussions then.
Let's pardon on that then.
Let's
I would
pardon.
just say, at a high level, Sarah, do we have a problem that work is done with grants and incentives and do not meet these guidelines?
I can only speak for the city and say the city does not have a concern about that. I mean, we have other internal written policies of the city that do this.
That's what just
Well, for the county though, because we don't have a historic preservation commission or an ordinance, we would refer to the state historic preservation office, which has authority from National Park Service to apply those historic preservation guidelines. So that would be helpful to the county to follow that.
All right. CR3, include public art interpretation and placemaking in public projects. And with willing private partners to tell the story of Flagstaff's indigenous peoples, pioneers of all races and ethnicities, innovators, community makers, and heroes, and memories of Flagstaff's community, and to inspire our current and future residents.
I have my hand up.
Did I read your mind?
Oh, somebody has their hand up.
Garcia?
Somebody has their hand up
Oh, sorry.
online. They just said that.
Someone online?
They just spoke.
It's Susie.
Hi, Susie.
Hi, can I just say this? I just think the word heroes needs to be removed from this. Because heroes sometimes to many people are traitors to others. So I just think it's not a good word to have there.
I don't know what the word placemaking means.
Yeah. It's heavily used in our current plan. I think I'm giving it a much lighter touch. But placemaking is the term that planners and architects use to describe what?
To justify their existence.
To justify their existence.
It's a whole employment term.
No, it describes how you organize physical spaces to encourage human activity that is healthy, socially, and economically productive. And so it is a way of applying social science to the built environment. And that's basically what placemaking is. And it can be actions, it can be objects, it can be activities, it can be all kinds of things. But when you design space, when designers create space in certain ways, it makes it more likely those things are gonna happen in that space. Where there's plenty of examples of very bad design where the space is unusable for the human activities for which it was intended. And so placemaking talks about that.
They accidentally create a negative place.
Yes,
Thank you. That helps. Are you going to define it?
sure.
Okay,
There's a
great.
lot of definitions for
Great, it's a good
placemaking,
idea.
but yeah.
Good.
Very common planning design.
Pretty much means the same.
Yeah, that one does mean the same in almost every context. Other,
I like the
other, it's
planners,
not,
though.
not mitigation. Mitigation means something totally different in 20 different contexts.
Any other comments on that one?
I do. Just a clarification, it says the story of Flagstaff's indigenous people, maybe just say it's the Flagstaff region.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's been-
Right, so that is
Hard to
all of our policies. Do we? Is that everything we go through, taking out in this, other document in terms of the strategy?
No, strategies is all gonna be, let me just explain, strategies will all be in one chapter. So just look them over because by the end of July, you will see a cumulative chapter that adds all these things up. So if you have questions about them, this is kind of your first look at them, so you can ask questions or start dialogue over email. We don't have to go over them in the meetings until much later, but I wanted to put them in front of you so you could see how a goal becomes a policy and a policy has an implementation guideline. And then there are strategies, which are our checklist of what the city and county need to do to get from where we are to where we go. Oh, Cindy, is your hand up from the last time you spoke, or did you have something else you wanted to add?
Sorry, it was up from last time.
Thank you.
All right. If you guys want to get back to your families, we can do some other stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do, public participation, do you have?
I think we lost some people.
Yeah, that was.
No, I'm just learning a lot. Thanks a lot, everyone. Did you want to say your name again? Oh, my name is Dennis Gibbons. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks, guys. Online.
Anyone online who's here for public comment? I see Tyler has joined us from the Housing Commission. Who is on the Housing Commission? Tyler, do you have anything to say?
I'm good, just listening in so I can report back to various groups, but thank you for asking.
So, I love this, it's number 7, summary discussion. You're gonna summarize that discussion for us?
We got a couple of things that were pretty much a lot of edits, but I have the parking lot. I will type the parking lot up and send it out after the meeting so everybody can see what we put a pin in. Please remember to send me an email if you're interested in Michelle's offer to go look at some examples of why some of the conclusions were drawn about the resource protection overlay. And that's, I don't know that I have much more to add for discussion. There's a few reserved things. Our next meeting is March 5th.
And the topic will be
Parks, Recreation, Open Space.
Sarah, can I make this suggestion? Instead of having our staff members do the talk, that. Oh, you build more realistic.
So my goal was 9. Was it supposed to be 8?
It was supposed to.
Oh, it's just about to be graduated.
Just looking at those.
Sure. If you guys are okay with that, do want to try and start at 5:30 for the deadline?
I can't get here.
Okay, yeah, we can do 6 or 9 still. We can always shoot for 8.
Just
Maybe
shoot,
it's
let's
better-
shoot for 8.
I always say like it's better to give people time back than to run late, so it's really just a psychological trick to make us feel like it's not so late.
Right?
All right, well, thank you for staying an hour late, everybody.
Wait, meeting times.
Hmm.
The meeting,
Number 8.
number 8.
Meeting.
No, I sent a memo. I think you have an old.
Number 8, yeah.
We need to do a meeting change.
Oh, we're doing a meeting change.
Yeah, you printed out an old one. Yeah. Sorry.
We are scheduling a change for the meeting number 6, for the request for an alternative date.
Yeah, so I sent out a memo that our original meeting 6 date is March 20th. However, the water and energy sections, both of the staff associated with water and energy have huge deadlines coming up in the next week or two. And they have not been able to get all the details worked out on those chapters. So they need a week or two extension. So I included 4 possible dates. So this is where you like pull out your phone or calendar right now. But they'd like to move the meeting from March 20th to either April 3rd or 2nd is the first choice. And then the March 26th would be the third choice. March 27th would be our last choice because it overlaps with the Planning and Zoning Commission for the county. So if we can make one of those dates work, the second or third would be the best ones, then that would allow us to have a little more time, let them meet their deadlines for more near-term projects and hopefully keep us on schedule. What that does mean is April, we will have lots to look at in April.
So it's April 2nd, March 26th, or
March 27th is the last choice. We can't pick any of those other ones. Right?
I'm definitely
You're
not
just
hearing.
looking for availabilities or preferences.
Yes.
I prefer Tuesdays over Wednesdays, for what it's worth.
So April 2nd.
I'm the opposite. Wednesdays over Tuesdays. Council meeting.
There you go.
True.
Mhm.
They're all fine. Is there anyone who's got like a really strong preference for some reason? Your kid has a concert that night, you know.
Which date? Because I'm not here on the 27th.
Wednesday, I'm sorry, the first 2 choice dates for staff would be Tuesday, April 2nd or Wednesday, April 3rd.
Looks like the chat has some.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I had the calendar open over the chat. Ally said she can do the 2nd, but not the 3rd. That persuade people to the 2nd. Yes. Okay, I will move that meeting from March 20th to April 2nd. It means we have a lot of meetings in April, but maybe we'll be in a workflow state of mind.
Okay.
Thank you. Then did miscellaneous to from with the next?
It is.
Anything specific, I just wanted to thank everyone for sharing tonight and having a quality conversation.
I just have one thing that, when you brought up something, I clearly understood what you said. Those 2 gentlemen who talked about firelight, and they told us that those were, and to me, all you said was, you don't have enough resources. That's for it. And I agree with that. Because we don't have enough resources. Yeah, we're really bad fire year, we're in trouble. Right. So that to me is all we're saying, and I think that it should be.
Well, we have the opportunity to say the chapter. Yeah.
The only thing I'll add is that we closed an RSOQ, which is a request for statements of qualification for writer, editors, and graphic designers for the plan. You see like everything is like low formatting right now. And we have a group of 5 people, a mix of people who do graphics and technical writing at the city and county, who's going to be reviewing our proposals for the qualifications of people who might want to work on the regional plan with us. And so that's going to be going on for the next month or so. And so I hope by late March, by maybe the early April meeting, I can tell you that we've brought a writer editor on board. And then the last thing is that the Jana, I know, convened the group to talk about the cover art, and they reviewed a proposal, and I think they've selected an artist to work on the cover art. I don't know if there's anyone here.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yes, who wants
We
to
were on-
talk about that really quick?
Go ahead.
That's from our December meeting.
So they worked really hard to come up with a really comprehensive overall plan for this cover art. It was actually really great. They do have somebody who's going to go out and reach out to the artists, and then they're gonna bring their plan in, and then they select a border. So we won't see that until
Later.
2 months.
And the artist did something innovative that kind of resembles how the plan is a living document. And they made their art project kind of a living art project. I can't really explain anything deeper than that, but it's somewhat innovative for what we're doing. And I think it's, with the staff, we're even bringing that up and bringing that together.
And they also wanted to see a draft at some point or even come to the meeting.
Yeah.
Because they're, I kind of mentioned, they probably want to have questions at some point, and the only way they're gonna have questions is if they review the draft. So I think that was the ongoing plan. That's it.
They want someone to help us with graphics, writing, editing, and then some artistic. And my understanding too is that they're not just gonna produce the cover, they actually offer to do like divider pages and inserts to help like kind of break the document down visually as well with a really interesting theme. So that's very exciting because I can barely draw a stick figure some days, so I'm excited to have all that help aboard.
Artist is, but she did our boxes to begin with. So I'm London Hall.
Yeah.
And if you'd like, I could bring the art boxes next time. If anyone wants to look at those.
So there's nothing else we can do with it.
All right, well, thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Yes.